12 letters. That was all Lien Zhao had to go on when she stepped off the train at Prospect, Wyoming territory in the thick heat of July 1881, her trunk containing everything she owned in the world and a folded stack of correspondence tied with string in her coat pocket. 12 letters, and a photograph he had never sent, because he had written in his third letter that he did not believe in vanity and did not see the use of a picture when words would tell her everything she needed to know. She had believed him. She had read those letters until the paper softened at the folds, until she knew the particular slant of his handwriting the way she knew her own name, and somewhere in the space between his careful sentences about cattle prices and Wyoming winters, she had let herself believe she was traveling toward a kind man, a patient one, a man who wrote in his 9th letter that he had not laughed at anything in longer than he could remember, and hoped that might change. But the man standing at the far end of the platform, watching her step down from the train car with an expression carved from stone, did not look like a man who hoped for anything. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than she had pictured, with a gun belt worn low and easy on his hip in a way that told her it was not decoration. His hat shadowed most of his face, but what she could see of it was hard, unmoving. His jaw was set like a man bracing for bad news, and his eyes, when they finally settled on her, held nothing she recognized from 12 letters of careful, gentle words. "Miss Zhao?" His voice was flat, not unkind exactly, but empty of anything that might have told her he was glad she had come. "Mr. Doone?" She managed the words steadily, though her stomach had dropped somewhere near the train tracks. "I did not expect—" She stopped herself before she finished the sentence, because she did not know how to say, "I did not expect you to look like a man who has killed people," without it sounding like an accusation before she had even set her trunk down on Wyoming soil. "You did not expect what?" It was not quite a question. He said everything like a statement, like a man used to being obeyed rather than answered. "Nothing," she said. "The heat, perhaps. I did not expect the heat." Something flickered behind his eyes, and for one moment she thought she saw the man from the letters trying to surface behind the stranger standing in front of her. Then it was gone, folded back beneath that same unreadable stillness, and he reached for her trunk without another word, hefting it onto one shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. "Wagons this way," he said, already walking, and she found herself hurrying to keep pace with the stranger's back, 12 letters worth of careful hope curdling into something closer to dread with every step across the dusty platform. She had left Sacramento 6 weeks earlier with a resolve she had built slowly and deliberately, the way she built everything. Her family ran a laundry near the rail yards, and she had grown up watching her mother's hands crack and bleed in winter from lye and cold water, watching the particular exhaustion of a life spent serving other people's linens for wages that never quite stretched far enough. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and had watched 2 younger cousins already promised to men twice their age, in arrangements her family called practical, and she privately called grim. When she had seen the advertisement in the territorial paper, a rancher seeking a wife, honest work, fair treatment guaranteed, she had told herself it was no different in principle from any other arrangement, except that this one came with the strange, unexpected gift of correspondence. 12 letters in which a man named Caleb Doone had written to her about drought seasons and the particular blue of Wyoming sky before a storm, about a mother he had lost young, and a father who had taught him to shoot before he had properly learned to write his own name. He had never once, in 12 letters, mentioned that he wore a gun like it was as natural to him as breathing, or that his letters and his face might belong to 2 entirely different men. The wagon ride to his ranch took the better part of 2 hours, and he did not speak beyond the bare minimum required to point out landmarks. "That is the Sorensen claim. Creek runs dry most summers past July. Town's a half-day's ride if you need it. She sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap and her spine straight, cataloging every silence, every clipped sentence, and building a growing certainty that she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who regretted the arrangement as much as she was beginning to. The ranch itself, when it finally came into view, surprised her. A modest clapboard house with a wide porch, a barn in good repair, cattle grazing in the distance beneath a sky so wide and blue it made her chest ache in a way she had not expected. It was, in its way, beautiful. But beauty did not soften the man beside her, who brought the wagon to a stop, climbed down without offering his hand, and simply said, "Reverend Alcott's expecting us tomorrow morning. Figured you'd want tonight to rest first." "That is considerate of you," she said, and meant it as something close to sincere, testing for any crack in the stone. "It's practical," he said. "Long trip. No sense marrying a woman too tired to stand for her own vows." It was not cruel. It was not warm either. It was simply flat, factual, the words of a man reporting weather rather than making conversation with the woman he had asked across 12 letters to cross an entire country and become his wife. An older woman met them at the barn, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, introduced simply as Odessa, who kept house and cooked for Caleb 3 days a week and lived on a small plot a mile down the road. Odessa looked Leanne over with open, assessing curiosity, then turned that same assessment on Caleb with an expression that suggested long familiarity and very little patience for his silences. "You didn't even carry your bag in proper," Odessa said, shaking her head. "Lord, Caleb, the girl's traveled 2,000 miles and you're standing there like a fence post." "I carried the trunk," Caleb said. "Not the same thing, and you know it." Odessa turned to Leanne with a gentler expression entirely. "Don't you mind him, dear. He talks about as much as that barn does, but he pays his hands fair, and he's never once raised his voice at anything that didn't have it coming. That's more than most men out here can claim." It was, Leanne thought, the first genuinely warm welcome she had received since stepping off the train, and she held on to Odessa's words through that long, uncertain first night the way she might hold on to a lit match in a dark room. That night she lay in the small guest room he had prepared for her, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, and pulled the stack of letters from her trunk to read them again by lamplight, searching for the man who had written, "I have not laughed at anything in longer than I can remember." She found him in the words easily enough. She simply could not find him in the man who had met her at the station with a face like a closed door, and somewhere in that gap between paper and flesh her resolve began quietly to crack. She did not sleep well, and by morning her doubt had hardened into something closer to resentment. She dressed carefully anyway, because whatever else was true, she had made a promise across those 12 letters, and Leanne Jow did not break promises simply because reality had disappointed her. She found Caleb on the porch at dawn, already dressed, already still in that particular way of his, watching the sunrise like a man keeping vigil rather than admiring anything. "You're up early," he said. "I did not sleep." Something in his jaw tightened. "Bed uncomfortable?" "The bed was fine, Mr. Doone." She let a fraction more honesty into her voice than she had intended. "I find myself wondering if I have made a very grave mistake." For the first time since the train platform, he turned to look at her directly, fully, and she saw something move behind those flat eyes that she could not immediately name. "You mean me?" "I mean the man in your letters wrote about hope. The man at the station looked at me like I was a burden he had not yet found a way to refuse." She had not planned to say it so plainly, but the words were out now, and she did not take them back. "Which one am I meant to marry today?" The silence that followed stretched long enough that she thought he might simply walk away without answering, might retreat back into that unreadable stone and leave her question hanging unaddressed in the morning air. Instead, he set down the coffee cup he had been holding, and when he spoke, his voice had lost some of its flatness, replaced by something rougher. "3 days ago, a man rode onto this land looking for me," he said. "Name of Silas Rourke. We have history, him and I, and none of it is the kind a woman should have to hear about on her wedding morning. I did not sleep either, Miss Zhao. Not because I regret asking you here, because I have spent 3 days trying to decide whether asking you here was the most selfish thing I have ever done." She had not expected that. She had built, in one sleepless night, an entire theory of a cold man who had changed his mind and lacked the courage to say so, and that theory collapsed now under the weight of something far more specific and far more dangerous than simple regret. Who is Silas Rourke? A man who believes I owe him a debt I do not believe I owe. The kind of debt that gets settled with a gun instead of a handshake. Caleb's hands, she noticed, had gone very still on the porch railing. The same stillness she had mistaken for coldness the day before, but now understood might simply be the discipline of a man who had learned, the hard way, not to let his hands shake when it mattered. "I should have told you before you got on that train. I did not, because I was afraid if I told you, you would not come at all. And God help me, Miss Zhao, I wanted you to come anyway." The honesty of it, raw and unpolished in a way his letters had never quite managed to be, cracked something open in her that 3,000 miles of doubt had not managed to close. "You should have told me," she said, and there was no forgiveness in it yet, only fact. "But you are telling me now." "I am telling you now," he agreed, "because you deserve to decide with clear eyes whether you still want to stand in that church today. I will not think less of you if the answer is no." She studied him for a long moment, this stranger who had written her 12 letters full of hope, and met her at a train station wearing a stone mask over what she now understood was fear, not indifference, and felt something in her own resolve shift and settle into a different shape entirely. "I did not travel 2,000 miles, she said finally, to run from the first hard truth a man was honest enough to tell me." Something in his face changed then, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Then we'd best get you to that church," he said, "before I lose my nerve twice in one morning." The wedding itself was small, conducted by Reverend Alcott in a wooden church that smelled of pine and dust, witnessed by a handful of ranch hands and neighbors who regarded Leanne with open, unhidden curiosity that she bore with the same straight spine she brought to everything. Caleb's voice, when he spoke his vows, was steady in a way that surprised her, and when he took her hand there was a careful restraint in his grip, like a man handling something he was afraid to break. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, and if the ride was quieter than she might have imagined a wedding day should be, it was not the same silence from the day before. This silence carried weight, carried the shape of everything unspoken between two people who had just bound their lives together on the strength of paper and one honest confession on a porch at dawn. "Tell me about Rourke," she said, as the ranch house came back into view. "All of it. I would rather know what I have married into than be surprised by it." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses with the same economical precision he brought to everything, before he finally spoke. 5 years back I rode with a man named Rourke on a cattle drive up from Texas. We were partners of a kind, split earnings, shared risk. There was a night outside Dodge City when his outfit got hit by rustlers, and I made a choice that saved my own herd and left his exposed. He lost near everything that night. I did not owe him what he thinks I owe him, but he has spent 5 years believing otherwise, and men like Rourke do not let go of a grievance easily. You made a choice that saved yourself instead of him. I did. He did not flinch from the admission. I have turned that choice over more nights than I care to count, Miss Jow, and I have never once landed on an answer that lets me sleep easy. I made the decision a soldier makes in a fight he cannot win both ways. That does not make it clean. She considered that, the plainness of it, the way he offered no defense beyond the bare truth of what he had done. And now he has found you. Now he has found me, and he wants what he believes is owed, and I do not think talking will settle it. Caleb's jaw tightened again, that same stillness settling over him. I should not have brought you into a house with this kind of trouble sitting on the doorstep. I am sorry for that, truly. But I am not sorry I married you today. Whatever comes of Rourke, I wanted at least one thing in my life to be chosen plainly and honestly, and you are that thing. The words settled into her chest with unexpected weight, and she found herself, for the first time since stepping off that train, looking at her husband and seeing something closer to the man from the letters. Not soft exactly, but honest. And honesty, she was beginning to understand, might matter more than warmth in a place like this. 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended quiet, the ranch settling into a rhythm that Leanne found herself, despite everything, beginning to trust. She learned the particular geography of the house, learned that Caleb rose before dawn and worked until his hands were raw, learned that he ate in silence but always made sure her plate was filled before his own. She helped Odessa in the kitchen on the mornings she came, learning recipes that were nothing like the food of her childhood but carried their own kind of comfort, learned to bake bread that did not always rise properly, but that Caleb ate without complaint regardless. She learned, too, that beneath the flat stillness he wore like armor, there was a dry, careful humor that surfaced rarely and always caught her off guard when it did. "You've been counting my silences," he said one evening, catching her watching him across the supper table with an expression she had not managed to school quickly enough. "Someone should," she said. "You spend enough of them, it seems only right they be recorded somewhere." Something that was almost a laugh escaped him, quick and unpracticed, like a muscle he had not used in some time. "First time in longer than I care to admit," he said, "that anyone's managed that out of me." She held on to that small victory longer than she probably should have, turning it over in her mind the way she once turned over his letters, searching for what it revealed about the man underneath the stone. She was beginning, slowly and against every careful instinct she had built over 23 years, to want to know that man fully. One evening, mending a torn shirt by lamplight while Caleb cleaned his rifle at the same table, she asked him plainly why his letters had never once mentioned Rourke or the life that came with a gun belt worn so easily on his hip. "Because I wanted you to know the man I intended to be," he said, not looking up from the rifle. "Not the man 5 years of hard living had made me into. I've done things on cattle drives and in towns I am not proud of, Leanne. I did not think a woman deciding whether to cross a country for a stranger needed the whole ugly accounting of it in a letter." "I would rather have the accounting than the surprise." "I know that now." He set the rifle down and looked at her fully, something rawer in his expression than she had yet seen from him. "I am learning a great many things about what you would rather have, Miss Jow, and finding I would like to spend considerably more time learning them." It was on a hot afternoon in early August that the quiet finally broke. She was hanging washed linens near the porch when she heard the sound of horses approaching, more than one, moving at a pace that told her before she saw them that this was not a friendly visit. Caleb was out at the north fence line, too far to reach the house before the riders arrived, and she found herself standing alone in the yard as 3 men drew their horses to a stop at the edge of the property. The man at the center, lean and weathered, with a scar cutting across one eyebrow, dismounted with unhurried confidence. "You'd be the new Mrs. Doone," he said, and his voice carried the particular politeness of a man who found threat more effective delivered softly than shouted. "Silas Rourke, your husband and I have unfinished business." "He is not here," she said, keeping her voice as level as she could manage, though her pulse had climbed sharply. "I can see that." Rourke's eyes swept the yard, cataloging the house, the barn, the distance to the fence line where Caleb's figure was now visible, moving fast on horseback. "Tell him this. He's got until Sunday to settle what he owes me, or I start collecting some other way. A man's got more than money he can lose, Mrs. Doone. You understand my meaning." The threat, delivered so calmly it took her a full second to register its full weight, sent something cold and sharp through her chest. But she did not step back, did not let her voice shake when she answered. "I understand you rode onto another man's land to threaten his wife because you did not have the courage to wait for him directly." Something flickered across Rourke's face, surprise perhaps, or the particular displeasure of a man unused to being spoken to plainly by a woman he expected to frighten into silence. "Feisty," he said, "for a mail-order bride." "Careful," she said, "for a man alone in another man's yard." He laughed then, short and humorless, and swung back up onto his horse without another word, wheeling his men around and riding off in a cloud of dust just as Caleb reached the yard, breathing hard, his hand already on the grip of his gun. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough with an urgency she had not heard from him before, his hands finding her shoulders, checking her over with a thoroughness that told her exactly how afraid he had been riding in. "I am fine." Her own voice shook now, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up with her. "He said you have until Sunday. He said if you do not settle this, he will find some other way to collect." Caleb's face went very still, that familiar stone settling over him. But this time she understood what lived beneath it. Not coldness, fear, controlled and disciplined into something that looked like calm. "He should not have come near you," he said, low and furious. "That was never supposed to touch you." "It touches me now," she said, "whether either of us wanted it to or not. So you had best tell me what you intend to do about Sunday, because I did not marry a man to watch him ride out alone to settle a debt that has already reached my own front yard." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its command and gone quiet instead. "I intend to end it," he said, "cleanly if he'll allow it. Rourke wants what he believes he's owed. I've got enough saved to settle the herd he lost that night. More than enough. I was too proud 5 years back to offer it outright. I do not intend to be too proud now." "And if he does not want money? If he wants something uglier than that?" "Then I will give him whatever answer he's come looking for," Caleb said. "And I will make certain you are nowhere near it when I do." That night, unable to sleep, she found him sitting alone on the porch steps long after the house had gone dark, his rifle across his knees, staring out at nothing in particular. She sat beside him without a word, and for a long while neither of them spoke, the quiet stretching comfortable rather than strained between them for the first time since her arrival. "I keep thinking on what you said," he finally admitted, "about not wanting to watch me ride out alone. 5 years I've handled every hard thing in my life alone, Leanne. Never had cause to think on what it might mean to have someone standing behind me while I did it." "You have that now," she said simply, "whether it frightens you or not." "It frightens me considerably," he said, and there was something almost wondering in the admission. "And I find I do not mind the fear near as much as I expected to." Sunday arrived hot and still, the kind of Wyoming summer day that pressed down on the land like a held breath, and Leanne found herself unable to remain in the house as Caleb prepared to ride into town for the meeting Rourke had demanded, held at the saloon in full view of half the territory. She had spent 3 days turning over every version of this day in her mind, and every version ended the same way, with a decision she had made quietly and without asking Caleb's permission, because some decisions, she had come to understand, were hers to make. "You are not riding in alone," she said, standing in the yard as he checked his gun belt with the same careful precision he brought to everything. "This is not a discussion, Leanne." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Zhao attached to it, and the weight of it did not escape her even in the tension of the moment. "Rourke is dangerous, and I will not have you anywhere near what happens today." "I am not asking to stand beside you with a gun in my hand." She met his eyes steadily. "I am telling you that I will be in town regardless, because Reverend Alcott has already agreed to let me wait in the church, and half the territory will be watching this meeting whether you want witnesses or not. A public settlement is safer for you than a private one, Caleb. Rourke is less likely to turn this ugly with the whole town watching than he would be catching you alone on some empty stretch of road." He stared at her for a long moment, something warring behind his expression, and she watched the exact moment he understood she was right, watched the stubborn resistance give way to something closer to reluctant respect. "You've been thinking about this since Thursday." "I have been thinking about very little else." The ride into town passed in tense silence, and when they arrived, the main street already carried the particular hush of a place that knew something was coming. Rourke and his 2 men stood outside the saloon, and the rest of the town had gathered at a careful distance, watching from porches and doorways with the wary attention of people who had seen this kind of reckoning before and knew better than to stand too close. Caleb dismounted first, walking toward Rourke with the same economical stillness she had first mistaken for coldness at the train station, and she understood now, watching him from the church steps where Reverend Alcott stood beside her, that this stillness was simply discipline, the careful control of a man who had learned that surviving danger meant never letting it see you afraid. "I've brought what I owe you," Caleb said, and produced a folded banknote from inside his coat, holding it out without hesitation. "Full value of the herd you lost that night outside Dodge, and interest on top for 5 years of waiting. I should have offered it then. I am offering it now." Rourke studied the note for a long moment, and something in his weathered face flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or the particular unsteadiness of a man who had built 5 years of grievance around an image of Caleb Doone that did not match the man standing in front of him now, offering restitution in plain daylight before half the town. "Money's not the only thing I lost that night," Rourke said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. "No," Caleb agreed. "You lost trust in a partner who made a hard choice under fire and never had the courage to face you honestly about it afterward. I cannot buy that back with a banknote. But I can stand here in front of every person in this town and tell you plainly that I was wrong not to face you 5 years ago, and I am facing you now." The street had gone entirely silent, and Leanne found herself holding her breath, watching Rourke's hand hover near his gun belt, watching the entire town brace for violence that hung in the summer air like a held match near dry grass. Then, slowly, Rourke's hand fell away, and he took the banknote from Caleb's outstretched hand with a roughness that was not quite gratitude, but was no longer quite hatred either. 5 years I've hated you for that night, Rourke said. Didn't expect you to just hand me the truth of it in front of God and everybody. I've had a lot of nights to think on what I should have done differently, Caleb said. Standing here honest seemed like the least of it. Rourke studied him a moment longer, then gave a single short nod, mounting his horse without further ceremony. We're square, Dune, he said. Don't come looking for me again, and I won't come looking for you. He wheeled his horse and rode out of town with his men trailing behind him, and the street exhaled all at once, the tension breaking into low murmurs of relief among the gathered townsfolk. Leanne crossed the distance to Caleb before she had fully decided to move, and he caught her in an embrace that carried none of the stone stillness from the train platform 3 weeks earlier, only the raw relief of a man who had walked toward danger and found his way back through it. You were magnificent, she said against his chest. I was terrified, he admitted, the whole time. Only reason I managed to stand there steady was knowing you were watching from those church steps, believing I could. 3 months passed, and the ranch that had once felt like a stranger's house to Leanne became, slowly and without ceremony, simply home. The herd grew steadier through the autumn months, the debt with Rourke settled and buried, and the particular quiet that had once unsettled her in Caleb became instead a comfort she had come to rely on, the silence of a man who had learned to trust her with everything he carried. She had taken to helping with the ranch accounts, her careful mind for numbers proving as useful with cattle tallies as it had once been with her family's laundry ledgers, and the improvement showed plainly by October, when Caleb sold the season's cattle for a better price than he had managed in 3 prior years, crediting her careful tracking of the market reports that came weekly by telegraph into town. Odessa had taken to calling her the smartest thing to happen to that ranch since the well was dug, a compliment Leanne treasured more than she let on. Caleb had built her a small writing desk near the front window where she kept, still, the 12 letters that had first brought her across the country, though she no longer needed to read them to remember the man who had written them. She had found him fully now, stone and warmth both, and understood that the two had never truly been separate at all. In the evenings she had begun teaching him a little of the reading and figures she had learned as a girl, patient exchanges by lamplight that neither of them called courtship, though both understood exactly what it was. "Regretting it still?" Caleb asked her one evening in October, watching her from the doorway as she worked through the month's accounts by lamplight, an old, familiar question between them now, worn smooth with repetition and long since stripped of its original sting. "Ask me again in 50 years, she said, without looking up, "and I will give you the same answer I have given you every time since that church. I regret nothing, Caleb Dune. Not the train, not the stone face that met me at the platform, and not one single letter that brought me here." He crossed the room and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, steady and certain in a way the man at the train station could never have managed. And Leanne understood, watching the lamplight catch the careful handwriting of the accounts she now kept for a life she had chosen with open eyes, that whatever she had feared in that first cold look on the platform, she had found instead exactly what those 12 letters had promised her all along. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.